Hey everyone, here's the best theory about every killer in Dead by Daylight. When I say best, I mean the theory that I think is the most plausible or likely actually true based on the evidence we have. Let's get into it. Trapper. Trapper designed the basement and the hooks. It's been theorized for some time that Trapper is more than likely the designer of the hooks found within the trials, as well as the basement. This is largely down to their visual design being very reminiscent of Trapper's own look, and the basement especially holding many more connections, with it fitting the most seamlessly into the Macmillan realm, and holding significance to Trapper due to him also leaving his father to die in a storehouse basement. In Tome 23 we further got potentially more confirmation, with Trapper seeing the hooks of the realm and thinking, "These hooks, these are my hooks." This also links to the theory that the hooks puncturing Trapper are from the entity punishing his disobedience. There's a possibility that at one point in time, Trapper was a survivor, and so the hooks puncturing him were from these days of being the one on the hook. Either this, or he self-tested them, I guess. Wraith. Wraith rings his bell to warn the survivors he is coming. This is a popular theory that Wraith's bell makes a loud ringing noise, despite it being a detriment to his power, due to it giving the survivors a chance and alerting them that he is coming for them. When Philip lives in Nigeria as a boy during the Civil War, he is told to ring a bell if he sees soldiers coming. However, he fails to do this, causing the entire village to die aside him. This is a moment that hangs forever in his memory and causes him great trauma. Therefore, in a final kindness to those he is now about to kill, he rings his bell to give them the head start he wishes he could have given to his family and villagers. It shows the inner remaining humanity of Wraith, I think, which I quite like, and feels like a pretty robust tie-in to his lore. Billy. Billy owned the toolbox survivors now use. This is a very simple theory, but one of the best I think due to that. It's simply that the previous owner mentioned in the toolbox flavor text is Billy. He's the one they used to belong to, and the survivors now use, with there being some hint toward it being a killer. He is of course famously a tinkerer, and crafted his own weaponry. It would also explain why the tools are so depleted, because he's exhausted them thoroughly. Nurse. Crota's Pren contains entity-afflicted patients. This is my favorite theory about Nurse, that everyone within Crota's Pren Asylum was affected or afflicted by the entity in some way, and that's why they were there. The patients all seeming to be heavily traumatized and even experiencing visions or whispers that seem to be from the entity. We know from throughout DBD lore that the entity likes to whisper to various characters to manipulate them or push them towards some sort of end. All of them could have been here to torment Sally specifically. One patient draws Sally as the nurse years before she becomes her. Another asks Sally if the trial has begun, as if they know about her future in the realm. It's more than likely that Crota's Pren's location is situated atop an overlap, a crossing between the entity's realm and our own, causing a higher density of strange occurrences. This could also explain the freak accident that caused the death of Sally's husband, Andrew. So whilst the entity doesn't seem too explicitly involved in Nurse's life, I think it actually might be one of the most involved it's been. Myers. He wandered into the realm. This is still my favorite theory, and I do think the best too. Despite Myers' lore being quite restrictive, there is an interesting Benedict Baker quote we have about him that talks about how he possibly entered the realm. It reads, "He does not strike me as someone who even went unwillingly to this place. Is there more to this being than I can fathom?" Many take this to mean that Myers actually just wandered into the fog and the realm, possibly following Laurie. He chose to be here, and it was never the entity's intention to take him. This could also explain Myers' far more unique gameplay and power that seem to be far more defiant of the entity's rules. Hag. Hag drinks blood to stop her from petrifying. This is sort of a half and half theory, as the only confirmation of this we have is through a cosmetic, which has always been questionably canon. It details that she's essentially a fossil, and that she'll petrify or turn into stone unless she drinks the survivor's blood. This is quite interesting, as it maybe suggests too that the entity specifically keeps her on the edge of petrification and keeps her hungry to make sure she remains loyal. The opposite to this too is that she seems to become more powerful the more blood she drinks, with this outfit depicting a powered up version, mentioning her growing stronger by the day, and we can see the living blood literally pumping through her. So maybe the entity's a little bit scared as well, who knows. Either way, the best she gets is a small dribble after hitting the survivors. Doctor knew about the Unknown. This theory is largely due to the timeline overlaps between Doctor and Unknown, and Doctor being part of the CIA, or previously the OSS, during the 1950s to 70s. In Unknown's lore we learn about the OSS, a government agency who were conducting experiments in various locations, such as schools, movie theaters, and hospitals, conducting mind control experiments on unknowing civilians, with some disappearing. Therefore, it's highly possible that Herman was actually on board with these experiments at the Larry site, or at least aware of them, and the stories of the unknown, and the strange disappearances across the country. He could have contributed to these mind control experiments. After all, it seems very up his alley. His job at the Larry site was about extracting information after all, although largely through electroshock therapy. There's a good chance though that Herman knew about the strange stories of the unknown, and its hallucinogenic properties. Huntress. Anna is a werelk. This is a simple and debatably proven theory due to the presence of werelk now in game. However, for years prior it was theorized that Anna was in fact a werewolf or a were-creature of some kind, due to her strangely superhuman strength, endurance, and ability to survive and fight against overwhelming odds, or surviving direct flamethrower fire. In her blighted outfit there's also some hints toward this, with her growing a considerable amount of hair across her body. The blight serum often draws out and highlights a person's key or true features, so this is a bit of a reveal. Anna's role as a werelk may also not be literal though, but instead a result of the stories about her over the years. Due to the legend she created for herself, and the fear surrounding her, she was believed to be a supernatural being, and so this manifests in the realm as the werelk, even if the stories all along weren't true. Due to how the realm works and all of its mixed up memories, this could have caused Anna to transform, which is more what the cosmetic hints toward, which is why the whole werelk thing is more of a theory overall still. Bubba. Bubba makes the survivor pudding. A few months before Bubba came to the game, the survivor pudding was added during the first anniversary for the game. The theory goes that Bubba was actually in the realm prior to his official release, with him acting behind the scenes as the cook of the survivor pudding. Whilst he historically wasn't the cook for the Sawyer family, with this instead being the cook, he could well have learnt from him, or at least be mimicking him. We know that Bubba serves the entity mostly out of fear, and has even been attacked by it before, so possibly in the early days of coming to the realm, he was put on dinner duty, as it were, forced instead to take the survivor remains post-trial to make the survivor pudding ready for the anniversary celebrations, possibly due to some performance anxiety or something. Freddy. Freddy killed Nancy before he came for Quentin. The theory here is that we got Quentin in DBD instead of the debatably more important and central character of Nancy, due to Freddy killing Nancy prior to coming to the realm. This seems very plausible too, given Freddy returns at the very end of A Nightmare on Elm Street and kills Nancy's mother. Nancy may have followed soon after, with Freddy then seeking out Quentin. Other signs to point to Nancy's death are her face appearing in Freddy's old power, hinting that her soul may be trapped within, and also her portraits found sprawled across the walls of Springwood with claw marks slashing across them. Pig. Pig is frequently nerfed as a test. This was a bit of a joke theory at first, but more and more I sort of buy into it and like it quite a bit. It's the idea that all of Pig's nerfs over the years, and the persistent nerf Pig joke, is all intentional by the entity. A key thing Amanda's prior master, Jigsaw, did was test her in various ways, to test her loyalty and to judge how she acted. Therefore, all the nerfs over the years have simply been tests for Amanda to deal with to see if she'll remain loyal, even if her trials begin getting tougher and more unfair for her. Her belief when entering the realm is that this is what Jigsaw wanted for her all along, but will this hold true with the entity's tests? Clown. Clown also entered the realm accidentally. Similar to the Myers theory, I think this one's very good too and explains a lot. At the end of Clown's lore, he's on the run after one of his victims escaped his binds, leading him to be hunted. The lore even states that somewhere along the way he left the ordinary roads of the United States behind, traveling through a veil of mist and entering a new realm. Therefore, it seems quite likely the entity was never even trying to get him, and he literally just rode into the realm, Maybe through an overlap of some kind? We've seen this is possible with characters like Sable, who literally walked their way into the realm. This would also explain why Maurice gets burnt when entering the fog, because the entity wasn't expecting it, and so to make reparations, it provides Maurice a third eye to see once more. Maurice may have also been burnt due to the speed at which they entered if they were galloping on a carriage, for example. Spirit. Her father worked at a train manufacturing company. This is a long-standing theory that you may have heard. It's the theory that the job Spirit's father was fired from was actually a train part manufacturing company. After her father is haunted by the entity and begins to hear voices and slowly goes crazy, he loses his job due to a defective production line. This is presumed to be a train part or even a train itself, this faulty part eventually causing the derailment of Adam's train during his lore, which ends up in him coming to the realm as well. This is a good theory, I think, as it adds a direct connection between both Rin and Adam, along with all of the thematic connections, which is quite nice. Legion. Legion studied the Ghostface. Although it's never explicitly mentioned, it is hinted toward, with Legion mentioned to study other serial killers and even having trading cards about them. A key one I'd imagine would have been Ghostface, a killer who they seem to have taken great inspiration from. They have similar black outfits with white masks, and their goals seem largely focused on chaos and mayhem, wanting to freak everyone out in the small town of Ormond. Ghostface was also finally revealed to the world in June 1993, with Legion's lore taking place in August 1996, making it highly possible Ghosty would be a recent and popular story they'd want to take inspiration from. It's also been pretty heavily theorized that Legion are meant to be an original version of the Scream Ghostface. Plague. Plague started the Black Veil. A popular theory, and one that holds the most weight for Plague, is that she's actually responsible for starting the Black Veil, a cult that views the entity's realm as a salvation and paradise to ascend to. This is very in line with the religion and views of Adiris and the Babylonians during her lore. Even the style and clothing is very similar between Adiris and the modern-day Black Veil or Talon cult members, such as Tori. It's noted to be an ancient religion or group by varying sources, and so it would make a lot of sense. After Adiris mysteriously disappeared in a cave in Arashtu, one of her followers saw her getting absorbed by a dark fog, proving their beliefs to be true and kickstarting the Black Veil cult. I like this too because it also just gives far more weight to Plague's importance. Her devotion literally kickstarted a cult that spanned the Omniverse. Ghostface. Ghostface worked at Autohaven Wreckers. This may seem odd and a little far-fetched, but I don't think it is really, and I think it actually works quite well for Ghosty's story. The origin of this theory comes from a certificate that can be found in Azerov's office in Azerov's resting place. It appears to be a certificate for the Employee of the Month, with the employee's name somewhat resembling Danny Johnson, the Ghostface's real name. This could have meant that Ghosty worked at Autohaven at some point, possibly even overlapping with Wraith's employment there. We know that Ghosty travelled throughout the country, and so he could well have stopped at Virginia at some point, taking on a job there. It's also possible that Danny learned from Azerov directly. Azerov was a prolific criminal after all, and ran a full-scale disappearing business, a business that Danny would surely find useful with his intentions to one day become a famed serial killer. The timeline does actually kind of work out too. Wraith's lore seems to take place a decade or maybe a little more past 1970. This means Ghosty could well have worked at Autohaven when he was about 18 to 20, and by 1993 when he gets taken by the entity, it would mean he's about 30 or in his early 30s, so the timelines weirdly line up too. The other great theory that sort of aligns with this one somewhat, and could be a hint toward why he went to Autohaven, is that Ghostface was actually aware of the realm to some degree. We know that he studies some of the other killers in the realm, for example Trapper, or referred to as the Miner in his lore, and there's also a cosmetic that possibly hints toward Ghostface knowing and one day wanting to ascend to the realm. Demogorgon. Demo was loaned to the entity by the Mind Flayer. This is a very popular theory, and I think the best, with it being fun yet genuinely plausible, and a far more interesting way to explain away Demo's brief absence from the game. This theory goes how it sounds. Instead of being taken by the entity, Demo was loaned to it by the Mind Flayer, in return for possibly aid in overthrowing Hawkins and the wider world. The loan then ran out in 2021, where Demo returned to help the Mind Flayer in its war on Hawkins, only to return once more 3 years later in 2024 to the realm. It's a bit more interesting to consider it this way, I think. It's also decently plausible due to Vecna and the Mind Flayer's own respective power. Oni. The entity forces Oni to wear his Oni mask. This is a very popular theory too, and pretty canon in my opinion. The idea here is simply that Oni did not choose to wear his mask, but instead he's forced to by the entity. Oni was given the Oni Yamaoka name by a lord, a name that hurt his pride and family name by comparing him to a demon. This led to Kazan killing the lord by ripping out his tongue, stopping him from spreading this name further. In the realm therefore, the entity forces Oni to wear the Oni mask, for the purpose of infuriating him, making him angry and more effective in the trials, and therefore also giving the entity more to feed on, a form of torment and punishment. Deathslinger. Caleb sees the survivors as people who wronged him. This is a theory that does span a number of killers, commonly known as the White Eyes theory. This theory is the most pertinent to Slinger though, I think. The theory goes that the killers with white eyes are having their vision manipulated in some way, to see the survivors differently than who they are. This seems to be almost confirmed by Slinger's final moment of his lore, where he enters the realm and instead of survivors, he sees the people who wronged him during his life, and the tools to dispose of them. Caleb never really attacked the innocent before his entry to the realm, and so violence toward the survivors makes little sense. Therefore, this factor would make a lot more sense if he believes he's actually killing the people who wronged him, like the prison warden or Henry Bayshaw, or rival members of the Mason Kelly gang. Pyramid Head. The entity deceived him to believe the survivors are guilty. I decided to go with this one for Pyramid Head, as it's always been quite odd why he served the entity, and so willingly took its hand, or claw, I guess, to enter the realm, despite all the survivors being largely innocent aside a few. The lore even states that it was an invitation to duty and sadism. Unlike other killers too, where we can see their eyes and the possibility they're being manipulated, this guy just has a hulking triangular mass on his head, and therefore we don't know if he's being manipulated, but it seems quite likely due to his actions and acceptance in the first place. I mean, who out of the survivors really deserves it? Blight. Blight and Vigo are the same person. This theory goes that Talbot Grimes, the Blight, and the mysterious Vigo are actually the same person. The core idea of this is that the two of them are so closely bound by the blighted substance. Blight uses it originally to escape the void, and it eventually becomes his power within the trials. Vigo also used it and had a laboratory in the realm, which is found by Blight, but also by the survivors. It's possible therefore that Blight is simply Vigo, but he forgot. Blight has an incredibly fractured, almost kaleidoscopic memory after all, and so it's possible he doesn't remember his days of roaming the realm, where he may have found the Blight far sooner and studied it, only to later find it again once he lost his mind, believing it was someone entirely different named Vigo. Vigo is a character we've never seen or encountered within the wider DBD lore, so it's hardly impossible. Due to Blight's heavy experiences with the multiverse too, it's also very plausible that Vigo is simply Blight from a different universe, a version who managed to stay sane where he didn't, and eventually escape the realm. The original tome entries we had before Blight was revealed too were believed to be from Vigo. They were literally mistaken from each other by the community. Twins. Twins share a soul. This is one of the more straightforward theories about twins, but one of the best and most plausible, I think. The idea that they share a soul, and Victor is in reality just Charlotte's memories of him manifested into a being through entity magic. This would explain why only one is able to awake at any given time. When Victor detaches, only one of them can be controlled and awake. It's also why Charlotte is able to regrow him within her, because he literally is just a part of her. Victor, of course, is also technically considered a power, despite being a person. All of it hints toward him not really being quite real. And if he is, then it's potentially a situation where their soul was split in two, or something like that. Some sort of entity trickery, I suppose. Trickster. Trickster knows we are watching. There's a number of killers in game who will turn around and face us whilst in the lobby. but one that does it to the greatest extent is Trickster, who even winks at us. I think this is part of the reason why Trickster is so obedient as well, and happy in the realm despite it being different to his usual preferred scene of lots of adoring fans. That's because we're here, always watching and observing, viewing his violence. Whilst other killers may be aware they're being watched, Trickster is aware we are watching him as an audience, with many even cheering him on. Otherwise, I could see Trickster not really being too down with the trials. Sure, he gets to experiment with screams, but he never gets that fame, which was definitely a huge desire and goal for him as well. Nemesis. Nemesis has been reprogrammed. This is a simple theory, but it's just the idea that Nemesis has been reprogrammed by the entity, explaining the different behavior in the realm. Where before he was set on killing stars, now he doesn't have this goal, at least not primarily. Seeing as the Any Alpha Parasite has also been removed seemingly and is now an add-on, it's likely there's something else now in Nemi's brain controlling him. Maybe an entity-adjusted parasite of some kind, possibly? Pinhead, the entity invaded the Hellraiser universe. This is a theory I like a lot, as there's a decent amount of supporting evidence that the entity actually overthrew Pinhead's world, instead of just taking him or the box. The main signs are in the add-ons and also who isn't present. Despite Pinhead and Chatterer being in the realm, there's a notable absence of Butterball and the female Cenobite. Despite this, there's add-ons referencing them, but hints toward the fact they were killed, with Butterball's lens being shattered, and the impaling wire of the female Cenobite being removed. There's further an engineer's fang, an engineer being a creature of the labyrinth. This could mean the entity was actually quite forceful in getting the Cenobites into the realm, doing so by force and invading them. Artist looks the way she does as it's how she views herself. Artist's appearance in the realm may seem strange, as there's nothing at the end of her lore to indicate why she looks this way. She's a regular person before this, with the main change being her hands and tongue getting cut. The reality, I think though, is due to the realm running on emotions, that this affects how the killers physically change too. Artist always viewed herself to have an inner darkness, which we can tell based on the Garden of Rot add-on. This rotting darkness she describes may be what we now see covering her body. This is her own artistic interpretation of herself, basically. Sadako. Sadako was never saved from the well. The best Sadako theory to me is that despite the somewhat beautiful moment of connection made between Sadako and the entity during her lore, this moment is actually all lies, with the entity in reality deceiving Sadako by making her believe she has been saved from the well, when in reality she's simply projecting herself into the trials and never actually left. She's been deceived. This would explain why she acts fairly different, and isn't fully manifested even when she's meant to be. Dredge. Dredge is the Garden of Joy. This theory is that Dredge was not just created by the inhabitants of the Garden of Joy, but is the overlap that existed there come manifest. This would explain Dredge's dark fog-like appearance and entity similarities. The Garden of Joy event was so emotionally potent that it resulted in the overlap there literally coming to life and absorbing all the people. Wesker. Wesker is trying to overthrow the entity. I think this is a fun theory considering who Wesker is. I think even within the realm now, he still probably thinks he's a greater force than the entity due to his ginormous ego. Therefore, the theory goes that despite the entity giving him everything he wants and even a perfected Ouroboros serum, he isn't happy. This explains why he, unlike the other killers, willingly injected himself with the Blighted Serum, in order to gain dominance, but maybe also one day take down the overlord of the realm itself. He must be superior. Night. Night is a supernatural being. This theory comes down to the opening of Night's lore, where his mother feeds him a thick black fluid-like medicine. This is presumably poison. However, throughout his life, Night is insanely powerful and defeats all of his opponents with ease. He's viewed as the embodiment of evil and unkillable, and this seems to genuinely be the case too. Therefore, it's plausible that this thick black fluid was some sort of supernatural or even entity source substance that was never meant to kill him, but instead empower him, a last resort used to save her son, and some sort of dark magic which brought out the evil within him. Skull Merchant. Skull Merchant utilizes AR or VR in her mask. This is a simple theory, but it's simply that the reason for Merchant's mask at all, and her eyepiece, is due to it having inbuilt AR technology, which assists with her tracking and connection to her drones. In her lore, she does have clear experience with AR and VR, therefore its incorporation here seems pretty likely, despite not being explicitly stated. Singularity. Hux was always being controlled. When Hux touches the crystal and gains sentience, he appears to gain a high degree of intelligence. However, nothing we see really ever shows this off. The reality more than likely is that the crystal he touched contained the entity or a connection to it. Whilst the entity provided Hux with awareness, it instructs him directly with dark and aggressive thoughts to one day end up in its realm and the trials. Therefore, I think it's pretty likely that he was never truly as free as he believed, and it was all just manipulation. Xenomorph. Xenomorph obeys the entity because it also took the queen. This is a simple theory, but the most plausible one I think as to why the Xenomorphs in the realm are even bothering to abide by the entity's rules, despite their animalistic nature. The entity cleverly took their queen and threatened her in order to get them to obey it, with them knowing that they'll die out without their queen. Chucky. The entity is actually helping Chucky, not Charles Lee Ray, his human form. This theory goes that the ghost that helps Chucky to pick survivors up when he's carrying them is actually the entity and not himself, Charles Lee Ray, despite him appearing that way. After all, this ghost or spirit is made up of a dark fog-like substance, and is also completely silent. It doesn't say anything, and its expression is very blank. Whilst Chucky is known to dabble with dark magic himself, it's highly possible when entering the realm, the entity is just helping him directly due to his size. Unknown. Unknown predicted the future. This is one we've covered in a lot of detail before. This theory essentially goes that Unknown was predicting future chapter releases by means of various voice lines it said since its release in March 2024. I lived in Dungeons Long Forgotten, referencing Dungeons & Dragons, June 2024 release. Prepare for the Expedition, referencing Lara Croft's expedition to Yamatai, with her release in July 2024. Tonight the World at My Feet, being a reference to Castlevania's Dracula, released in September 2024. Have You Seen My Dog, referencing Houndmaster's release in November 2024. Hunger, Intolerable Hunger, referencing the release of Kaneki with his Intolerable Ghoulish Hunger in March 2025. Then finally, Nobody Leaves Tonight, referencing Springtrap of FNAF in June 2025. Is there a voice line for Krasue? Let me know if you can think of one. Vecna. Vecna was baited by the entity. This theory goes that the entity was well aware of Vecna's intrigue and his like for a good mystery and the pursuit of power, and so it devised a specific challenge for Vecna, formulating a complex but solvable language for him to decode, leading to his fascination of the realm and goals to one day overthrow it, when in reality it was all just bait to get him here. After all, it's been confirmed that the entity's language doesn't actually have a definitive meaning, it's more of a shifting meaning. Yet Vecna claims to have solved it into a readable language. Therefore, it's more than likely this was all just a trap, a ploy to bait Vecna in and control him. Dracula. Dracula only stays because he made a deal. This deal is simple, I think, being that he doesn't fight back or resist the entity, and in return he gets certain privileges as the Lord of Darkness, such as his castle, and maybe even some of his minions along for the ride. It's a very unique case after all, getting to keep your whole house when coming to the realm. Houndmaster. Houndmaster gained powers from the overlap. In her years of survival, she lived for a long time on a mysterious island on top of an overlap. During this time, she sees many strange things that persist even after leaving. It seems likely therefore that her time in the overlap actually afflicted her with powers, specifically the ability to connect directly with her dog, Snug. In the realm we can see one of her eyes is a similar orange to that of her dog's, and when she goes to control him, she holds her fingers to her head as if literally connecting with him. It's not discipline, but instead real, true power and a supernatural bond between the two. Kaneki. Kaneki is always hungry. It may seem odd initially when looking at Kaneki as to why he's even serving the entity to begin with. What motivates him and stops him from fighting back, despite appearing like a good guy during Tokyo Ghoul? Well, the entity took Kaneki at a point of incredibly high emotion, just after he'd been tortured by Jason. Therefore he's likely being held here in this point to make sure he's always angry, but possibly to an even greater extent, hungry too, as Kaneki requires flesh and blood in order to survive. The entity starves him and keeps him hungry when outside of the trials. Therefore, when he goes into one, his inner ghoul comes out and takes more control. This causes him to be more brutal and obedient in order to get the blood he needs and hungers for. Springtrap. Foxy was taken too. This theory is somewhat Springtrap adjacent, but the theory is that Foxy's current absence from the game is actually down to him also being taken. If you search the pizzeria, you'll notice Pirate Cove, Foxy's usual home, is hidden away, and there's a box on stage 2 where Foxy should be, with a plushie of him on top. The reason why has to surely be that he was taken as well. Potentially not even on purpose, but it could be a similar situation to Myers or Clown, where they wandered in, or Foxy even followed Afton in, hoping to get revenge, but ending up trapped. Foxy, after all, is the fast one of the four, and could have sprinted toward Afton just as he was taken, and absorbed into the fog as well, with the entity currently deciding what to do with Foxy. Krasue. Burong held the Krasue curse for so long that she lost herself. This is a nice simple theory to end, but it's simply that Burong, after accepting the curse of the Krasue to aid in her singing career, utilized it for so long that now she is more Krasue than herself, with her seeming somewhat unaware of the deal made with the entity, with the lore simply stating, the creature always wanted more, and one night it was presented just that, a promise of meat hung on hooks, dripping with tantalizing blood. We can now even see in the realm that Burong is rarely even present, with the Krasue bursting out every few seconds. She gave in so much to this monster, she now seems to fully embody it, with herself maybe just being a remnant, a far-off memory. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to drop your theories too down below. Thanks, and goodbye.